Hi everyone, Rod Berger here. I've been incredibly fortunate over the years to capture the stories of global icons, Hall of Fame athletes, entertainers, NGO leaders, and political figures. I've traveled the world and back again, and you know what? I think it's time to shed light on the scribes of our time, those who have contributed to communities across our planet, securing opportunities for the disenfranchised, denying affronts to democracy, and establishing secure passage through choppy geopolitical seas. It's time to learn about the people behind the pens of policy and the keystrokes of democracy. Join me as we go behind the scenes with government and military leaders, cabinet members, visionaries, and sought-after intelligence officers. Let's go beyond the headlines to discover the bylines of our times. This is the Dr. Rod Berger Show, presented by Fair Observer. Welcome back to another edition of the Dr. Rod Berger Show, presented by Fair Observer. You can go to fairobserver.com for independence, diversity, and debate. And if you want to understand the world, do so one perspective at a time. And if you are a follower of me and you want to get a copy of my book, The Narrative Edge, you can do that where books are sold, to include the audiobook as well. Really looking forward to this conversation today. It's interesting because for those that know me, I've worked directly inside education, tangentially for years. And when you start to be able to say decades, that's when you really feel your age. But I can say that now. And I was introduced to a professor who really spoke to me and the way in which he responded to what would be a life-changing experience when you lose your position of no fault of your own. And I really appreciated what he did to speak out against this sort of startup approach to education, because I think we're at an intersection that we really don't know who's going first and in what direction we should be turning on to. We're going to be talking today with John Friedman. Professor John Friedman is a sociocultural anthropologist known for his passionate student-centered teaching. For over 2 decades, he taught anthropology at University College Roosevelt, part of Utrecht University in the Netherlands, before being made redundant in early 25 amid budget cuts and program restructuring. Refusing to stop educating, he continued to lecture publicly, even outdoors in the rain, and has since built a strong presence on social platforms where he shares lectures and insights. He advocates for humanistic inquiry and lifelong learning beyond institutional walls. John, so nice to spend some time with you today. Take me back to 2025. Obviously not that long ago, but it feels like we're living in dog years to some degree in the world right now. I know I heard you in another interview where you talked about sort of the day where it was actually in your lecture hall. It was in your classroom where the purging took place. Let's start with that as the angle, because it's not just that you lost your position as well as the department itself, but the way in which they did it. I don't know if it's dark comedy, if it's an insult that was targeted at you, but please share with the audience that experience of that day.
Sure. Well, thank you for having me, Rod. It's nice to meet you. I don't know exactly what the thinking behind the stage, so to speak, was for this event. It was unclear to all of us, but we knew that something was, let's say, quite strange when we arrived that morning. It was on a Wednesday morning, and all of us, all the faculty were called, and we were all given individual appointments to walk through a long hallway, entering on one side and exiting on the other. We were all emailed instructions on how to enter this building. It was the only building that remained open on campus because the managers had canceled classes and closed the university for 2 weeks in order to undertake this purge. And they had hired also private security at the time. I mean, we're a small liberal arts college. We're nice people. And standing in front of this door was a very large man, never seen before, private security guard who was ushering us into a classroom that they had decided to use for these meetings. And sure enough, it was the classroom that I had been teaching in all semester long. And that was really quite a shock, I think. I entered the classroom. I was sitting before our dean and a member of the personnel department. And after 22 plus years of working to build what was a new college and a new type of educational program for the Netherlands, where I'd been teaching, I was hired to help start this new honors liberal arts and sciences program. I was essentially fired. It took 4 minutes, and that was all it took. And I was sort of the last on the list for that event because I guess my dean and my bosses know I sometimes talk a lot and talk back. So I think they saved me for the end. But all morning long, I saw my colleagues, including my wife, by the way, who'd also been there 22 plus years, walk into this room and walk out the door 5 minutes later in tears. And I think that, just first of all, watching all morning long, all of my colleagues just being purged really was sort of too much for me. And so I decided I didn't know what to do, to be honest with you. I felt very helpless. We all felt helpless. We had been given no information about what the plan was. It was all done very secretly. It just dropped on us, really. I mean, we knew there were challenges, of course, but we didn't expect anything like this. And at that moment, I didn't have any power sort of at my disposal. I didn't know what can I do. And I did, I guess, what at that time and in that context seemed like the obvious thing to do. I decided to lecture. And so I gave myself half an hour to write a lecture, and I called the lecture, and the students, they weren't able to get into the buildings. They were all outside. And I told them I would give a lecture. But I decided to actually hold this lecture and integrate my firing into it. So I knew that I was going to be fired because I saw everybody else getting dismissed. And so I started lecturing, and when my turn came, I sort of told my students I had to step away and get fired, and that I would come back and tell them what happened. And that's what I did. I went inside for 5 minutes. I didn't say a word, and they were surprised that I had nothing to say. I just said, "Oh, excuse me, sorry, I forgot I'm in the middle of class. I've got to go." And I just got up and walked out and went back out and finished my lecture. And it was really shocking. And some days later, to get back to your sort of opening reflection, the managers of the university realized they had made a huge mistake, and they tried to sort of unfire us and get us all back to start teaching again so that we could finish the semester, because the students were up in arms and the parents were threatening to sue. And how could they fire everybody 4 weeks into a 16-week semester? So they sort of called us all back, and I was not going to go back and solve their problem for them. But what I did tell my dean when he called me in and asked me to go back in, I said, I cannot go back into that classroom because, that space is a really sacred space for me and my students. It's where we meet. It's where we discuss. It's where we exchange ideas, and we say dumb things, and we make mistakes, and we learn together. And it's it was a safe space where we could do our thing. And that, he had really basically tarnished it and witched it. And I said, because I'm an Africanist, I've done a lot of my research in Southern Africa. I sort of said, I won't go back in there until you get me a witch doctor to fix my room. I won't go back in there and teach. And I refused to go in. And I said, are there any witch doctors here? And he sort of laughed at me, but I said, I'm serious. I mean, there are bad spirits in that room now. I'm not going back in there to teach. Sorry. And that's that's what he did. They really.
Yeah, I was just going to say, obviously you've had time to reflect, and I'm really curious because, look, I understand there are business decisions in every, look, higher ed is it's institutionalized. It is business in so many ways that is reliant upon thoughtful people that think much further beyond the four digital walls of a bank account, right? You're looking at development of young people and continuing the stories that have built our species and our communities and landscapes. But I'm curious as to the discussions that you and your wife might have had within days of this event in trying to understand even what went into the decision, as if to say, why these departments or why this department? Like, what was the decision process like? Because to me, not to be a doomsdayer, but what you both went through and your colleagues feels like a precursor to a lot of professors around the world, and that the clock is ticking. I mean, we hear, especially in America, we hear about consolidation of smaller colleges. Just today, I saw a story that University of Michigan is doing away with, starting in 27, first semester grades to give a better on-ramp. Well, I mean, look, we can peel behind that and say better on-ramp. I think you're getting a lot of people that are questioning the value of the institution and what it's providing at some level. I'm hearing that and with my kids' friends and their parents. How do you understand your place in the larger story, in the way in which we think about what is necessary and or can be discarded? And I know it's coming from a biased position, obviously, because, it's like someone saying, is your baby cute? Yes, my baby's the cutest.
Yeah. No, well, I'm a sociocultural anthropologist, and I often say, what we do is we ask big questions in small places, right? So, I mean, as an anthropologist, you go off to some small village somewhere, and you don't go there just to sort of learn about life among 100 people or so, but you're there to explore a big question about what it means to be human, and that's sort of our methodological approach. Ask a big question, go to a small place, and try to answer it. And, I'm working at a small university, a small college, and things are happening all around me. And also, in February of 25, there were a lot of other pretty strange things happening around the world, particularly in the US with the Trump administration. And it was a few weeks after Elon Musk showed up at USAID on a Saturday morning with a chainsaw. And over weekends, entire government departments were totally shuttered in the U.S. So things were happening very fast and strangely. And I was also having conversations with friends who were heading projects in South Africa, and from one day to the next, they have to fire 600 out of 800 of their employees because they got a fax from Washington saying their funding had been pulled. So things are happening all around. And at that particular moment, I think I reverted to that big questions in small places. And the small place was, what's happening to my university here? It seems to be happening all over the world. How can I explain it? And, just as a bit of context, I mean, our university, they cut 30% of employees that day. And 85% of us were in the humanities and social sciences. And most of us, 70% of us were over the age of 50, and a third of us were over the age of 60. And most of us were more advanced in our associate professors and full professors. So, and what they ended up replacing us with is business studies, AI, and engineering. So, I mean, you can see this, and this is a pattern we're seeing all around the world, actually. It's not a coincidence that 85% of us were representing the humanities and social sciences.
So 30% of the faculty were dismissed, and of that, 85% were in your domain.
Exactly. Well, humanities and social sciences, which is a very broad domain. But
doesn't it seem short-sighted, John, from administrators? Because, call me crazy, John, or tell me I'm far afield on this, but to me, in a world where Mo Gadat, Google X and prominent speaker around the world, he just said last week in Australia, he said we have less than 12 months being the smartest thing on this planet. Well, if that's the case, and we're headed at a fast rate of speed on a bullet train to singularity, I sure, as a parent and even as a community member, would want people to be, I think, a part of the humanities, because my pursuit of an answer is going to look incredibly different within months if he's correct. And I tend to think that he's correct. I don't think you can be spot on, but I think he's within the ballpark, probably. I'd be shocked if he's not. And it feels very short-sighted that these universities, big or small, and I love that, by the way, big questions in small places, that they're going to be able to keep up with the rate of change. I mean, it's what, 5.5 months? It's doubling itself. There's absolutely no way as a professor you can keep up with that.
No. I mean, these changes are happening, and no doubt. And I guess I want to sort of address two of the things you said is, and one, how can managers be doing this on the one hand? And on the other hand, look at what they're doing. Well, in terms of what they're doing, I mean, the cutting out of the humanities and the social sciences is essentially an attack on critical thinking and sort of
well put
human thinking skills, right? Which we learn through the humanities and through, the social sciences, where we learn to ask, really big questions and think through them very critically. And of course, these questions are very threatening, and they were very threatening to my executive board as well when I started asking them about what they were doing. So on the one hand, where you're talking about this, singularity and the changes that are upon us right now more than ever, we want our kids, or we should want our children, to have the critical thinking skills to be able to look out into the world, enter into the world as it is or as it is becoming, and be able to ask the right questions and make the right decisions for themselves. And I think, humanities and social sciences, these are the fields that give us that kind of critical thinking. So I agree with you 100%. How can we be doing this at a time where it seems like we need to be more critical about what it means to be human than ever before in our lifetimes? On the other hand, you ask, how is it possible that these managers can do this? Well, the people running universities these days, they're not academics. They're not educators. They're not teachers. These are neoliberal corporate people trained in modern day managerial science. And that's how they're running the show. We're a nonprofit university. We don't need to make money. We need to break even. We need to pay our bills. Our job isn't to make money. Our job is to deliver a certain type of liberal arts and science education. But the people that are running the universities do not have that context. They're there to just look at the numbers, and they see, oh, everybody's running to AI. They want to study engineering. People think, oh, anthropology, what kind of job am I going to get with anthropology? I'm going to graduate and be unemployed. We need to cut the sort of disciplines that aren't market driven and in demand right now, and we need to beef up the ones that are to meet the market demand. And it's incredibly short-sighted. It's in my view, universities have to subsidize fields of knowledge like governments subsidize people below the poverty line. I mean, you use the income that is being derived from business programs and law programs and engineering, and you use it to cross-subsidize religious studies, theology, philosophy, the programs that maybe aren't attracting as many people, but we still need them at the university. We need them in society. We need people out there thinking in those sorts of ways and challenging, authority and others with their questions.
John, one thing that I have not heard discussed, but I don't claim this will be the first it's being brought up. I don't know if we're having a conversation about the cliff that is coming, because even just a few years ago, I don't know, a decade ago, I'd be talking to Professor John Friedman, and we would have a conversation at some point in our interview about helping to develop the next generation of professor, of thought leader, of intellectual, of scholar that would take research in a different direction, impact the way young people learn. I can't believe that the field of education at that level is going to be something that's desirable tomorrow, let alone today, from younger people who might have been on that track if it was 2010, in the 90s. I'm very concerned that we will be losing people before we even had a shot at pitching them. And if that's the case, it's a little bit like the dean scrambling and trying to hire you back, right? And your colleagues. At some point, there's going to be this realization that, oh my goodness, we don't have anybody even in the classroom, even if we're trying to convey that there still is value for a young person to come and attend our institution of higher learning. Is that a discussion that you've had, I guess, behind the scenes with your colleagues? How do you see that playing out? Because I can tell you this, if I'm tenured and I'm already in my late 60s, why would I not just sort of retire? Like, well, I don't need this, right? I've contributed scholarship for decades. Unless it's purely about, you've got to provide and these sorts of things. But take money aside, why would anybody want to stick around?
No, I think it's a really important question. And I think that the trends in higher education, my father was a professor and a dean of a small college as well in St. Louis. And, he left sort of corporate business because he didn't like what he was experiencing there. It wasn't satisfying to him. It was, he became a professor and he started teaching. And actually, when I decided to go into the profession myself, I sort of had him a bit as a template, but I remember growing up him saying how difficult things were getting. And, he went on to be the dean of his college and how they were trying to cut back on tenure and but it still seemed like it was possible to do. So I thought this is an interesting life. And as I'm journeyed through it over the past 30 years, it has become, I mean, I think really brutal. It's a really brutal profession, and it isn't well known by those outside, because from the outside it looks like, oh, the professor, they teach, 8 to 12 hours of class a week. They have their summers off, done. But I mean, academics are so overworked. They are so stressed out. Their jobs are becoming more and more insecure. They are underpaid. They are often working for free. And the sort of political economy of academia has become, I think, quite dire. And I think you're right. A lot of people are, I think, regretting some of the choices they made about going into academia when they did. And I think a lot of young people are seriously thinking that this isn't the profession that's going to give them a meaningful, satisfying life. And so the question is, where are those people going to go? And what's going to happen to our places of higher learning or places of learning in general? I mean, we can talk about the whole range of the educational system. I mean, teaching isn't what it used to be. Teachers are under-resourced, overworked, underpaid, stressed out, under immense pressure. And the parents and society are demanding more and more from them and the kids they're teaching. It needs, I think the whole education system from kindergarten through higher ed has to be reassessed and looked at afresh.
And see,
Because
my concern, John, is I don't think there are enough people on this planet that care deeply enough to be able to sit there and have that conversation. And even if there are, they would still be reliant in some part on those institutions, organizations, in quotes, leaders, public-private partnerships. It's not just that they can sort of develop it in a bubble. And that concerns me, because I don't think there's incentive enough to think about what is going to happen. Because if you play this out, if we sort of roll the yarn out before the cat starts to play with it, you say, okay, what's going to happen to these smaller colleges and universities? Well, they're probably going to shut their doors. We've seen this happening, whether people pay attention or not. This is happening around the world.
Yeah.
China, what did they remove? Like 12,000 degrees a couple of weeks ago. There was a headline. And so if that's the case, then I would think that some of the larger the universities are going to stick around. But now instead of like trying to be one student that gets accepted out of, I don't know, 1,000 applications or 100, I mean, that's going to grow exponentially. And so at some point, the apathy is going to kick in. And if we think we have a class war now, I mean, that chasm is just expanding over and over. And so the question I would have for you then, John, is there a responsibility? I mean, what responsibility does education play in this? I mean, I'm not saying that this is professors or K-12 or, sort of K-20 broadly, but I'm curious, especially from the U.S. system, what responsibility is I think, tattooed on the system, not the people, because I don't see us teaching civics. I mean, I live in the wealthiest county in Tennessee, and I can tell you my neighbors who are architects and lawyers and working in finance, they can barely tell you how our local government is structured, let alone if they vote. My county, John, is it's like one of the worst in the state, if not the country. It's like 17-18% vote. And the state alone, Tennessee, is like the worst voting state, like actually showing up to the polls. So how can I not then transpose that over to education and say, at some point, people are just going to say, this is an uphill battle I'm not going to climb. I think education has to answer some of those questions.
I do. And, I think education we need to answer questions even before that about what is education all about and what is its purpose. I mean, education should be a form of liberation, really. But,
Right.
if you look at the history of education, I mean, that's just not what it is. I mean, publicly funded school, right, is a product of a particular moment in history. And it's really the Industrial Revolution that gives birth to the form of education that we know it today, right? I mean, prior to industrialization, people learned from their parents at home a skill, and they started working and learning and being educated at a very young age. And, dad was a blacksmith or a shoemaker or whatever, or a farmer, and you started helping out and you learned by working together with him or with your mother. And when, of course, labor started moving off the land and into cities and into factories, the economy at that moment, and of course, industrial parts of it needed certain requirements from its workforce, right? They needed to read. They needed to be able to tell time. They needed basic numeracy. They needed to work on a line, basically, and there was nothing in place. So this, of course, sparks the idea of, hey, we need to send young kids to school so that they get these basic skills, so that when they show up at the gates of the factory, they're equipped with the skills necessary for the economy to make good use of them. And I mean, that's not changing today, right? I mean, the economy and the broader developments in society are shaping the type of education that's being delivered today, all the way through the system, all the way up to higher education, from kindergarten through. And so there's a relationship there, and we need to really peel, I think, that far back in order to try to make sense of where we need to go from here. And really, what purpose is education serving? Is education there to serve an economy and to serve the capital in economy, or is it there to help people live fulfilling, full, satisfying, meaningful lives where they can make contributions to, their own lives and to the lives of others around them? I mean, what do we want out of this type of system? And that has to take us back, to a bigger question about what are we doing in the classroom? And I think, I've been building and working at a liberal arts and sciences program, which is quite, I mean, it's got a much stronger tradition in the U.S. than in Europe. But this idea of trying to bring together different fields of knowledge into one frame, for example, is quite a sort of different type of educational delivery. I mean, since the late 19th century, we've been specializing like crazy. This is where all the disciplines develop. Where and today, as an anthropologist, in the middle of the 20th century, an anthropologist had read Greek and Latin and history and was so broadly trained. And now, anthropologists are so specialized in some tiny little niche of the discipline, where there are 20, 30 people in the world who actually can converse with them about this topic. But this is happening in all fields, right? And we're living this way. And the great, beautiful thing about liberal arts and sciences is it's trying to build bridges between these different fields of knowledge, like it used to exist. I mean, there was an economy in political science. There was political economy in Marx's time, right? I mean, politics and economy, I mean, you can't talk about one without the other, but, we somehow broke them apart and we started focusing on them individually. And liberal arts and science and also anthropology are very holistic in that sort of way.
I hope you're enjoying today's interview. If you'd like to learn more about my work or advertise on one of my shows, you can visit me at drrodberger.com, or you can visit me in the lab, as I like to call it, at narrativestack.ai. You can also purchase my book, The Narrative Edge, Authentic Storytelling That Meets the Moment, wherever books are sold. And now, back to the interview. And that may be the challenge, John, because I think it sort of goes back, sadly, to the adage of follow the money. Like, who's incentivized, right? I don't see the incentive structures out there in our societies to support a broad, solid foundation of education for everyone. Because it goes back to your point about critical thinking. It's an attack on critical thinking. Because if we're developing citizens that can think critically, we're going to ask some very hard, probing questions, and we may not like the answers, and it will expose maybe what people's real intentions are. There's no incentive to educate. I mean, we see in the U.S. where we're migrating to these charter school networks, and I've seen it in my own state. There were warnings everywhere about what happened to Arizona and how it's bankrupting that state. Well, Tennessee is seeing the same thing, and it's It's serving one small sector of the populace. And so I think if we don't figure out the incentive structure, I mean, we can have the best of intentions, but I don't have enough faith that people will pay attention. And as an example, and we could probably go through several, I have seen USAID in action in Africa when I've been there. And the minute that happened, I was so disappointed in the number of people that I thought were really thoughtful people in my inner circle who couldn't have cared less, whose approach was, if it doesn't, quote, impact them, then why are we spending money on it elsewhere in the world? And while incredibly naive and dare I say ignorant, to me, it is actually serving a purpose by those that are making these decisions, right? We are cutting ourselves off. We're becoming isolationists in a way that says, I don't care if John Friedman is my neighbor. I care about my lawn and my ability next door to be able to water and keep my lawn looking good. I don't care about John or a data center. And so that's an area that I think is, I don't know if education is sort of is it the canary in the coal mine? I don't know, but we're seeing it everywhere.
No, absolutely. And it's all part of the same system. I mean, if we step back a little bit, I think we're about the same age. And I mean, the sort of the neoliberal turn, for example, happens around, Thatcher and Reagan. And prior to that, in the post-war era, there was a very strong sense of a collective movement together of people through time and space, right? I mean, there was much more society. You've heard the bullying alone thesis and so forth. And Reagan and Thatcher jump onto the scene, and we start moving towards this sort of neoliberal shift away from society, to the point where Margaret Thatcher even declares in one of her speeches, there's no such thing as society, they're only individuals. And this brings in, a much more free market capitalism and a much more individual approach to everything, right? I mean, this just, globalization and all of the spreading of this ideology really around the world. But what you also have happening, starting in the 1990s, which is really interesting and leading up to today, is another sort of very symbiotic transformation through the development of algorithms and how, we are effectively individuals because, what we have in our hand and our computers, it's all unique to us. So we're being really treated like individuals by our algorithms who are feeding us the ads that we're interested in, and you're getting different ones. And we sort of are operating in this world where we're being atomized as an individual person all the time. I mean, even in the classroom, I've seen it over the past 25 years. I entered the classroom 25 years ago and I taught students. I had a class of students. And I knew that 10% of them were gifted and were going to be bored by what I had to say. And I'm going to lose them. And I knew 10% of them were not really up for this and I was going to lose them. So I sort of am teaching to the 80% in the middle. And by 15 years later, I'm not staring at students anymore. I am staring at 25 individual people, all with their unique demands, including their unique abilities and disabilities. And I'm being asked both by the students and by their parents and by the administration and by the system to teach them all individually, give each one actually what they need. And this is continually reinforcing the idea for example, the young person that, hey, I'm an individual. I deserve individual attention. And it's continually pressing this question and forcing everyone to say, what makes me so unique? I mean, on social media, it's about what makes me different from everybody else. And in the process of all of these transformations, as we become more and more atomized and individuated and asking about our uniqueness as individual human beings, we totally forget and neglect this question of asking, why am I an ordinary person just like everybody else? Where do I find commonality with you or with you? Instead of saying, what makes me different from you, we stop asking what makes us similar to one another. And this pulls us apart from each other and continues this process of, as you're observing too, individuating society and people. And in our parts of the world, I think in the US, even much more so than in Europe, but compared to where I've been doing my research in Southern Africa, it's, these processes are at different points. I mean, Southern Africa is still very collective and compared to North America or Europe, but these are rolling along, and it's a combination of economics and politics and technological development that sort of seems to be disposing us all in those ways. And that's, of course, why I think, there have to be some breaks. I mean, there doesn't have to be, but we would hope that there would be. And humanities and social sciences and spaces within society to critically think about these issues are one small place where we could try to break this a little bit, or at least question it. But, that needs to go as well. So, yeah, I don't know. I don't want to get too depressed about it, but I mean, these are really long
I'm
trends.
so glad you said that, John, because it's so interesting. It's, I think about being a parent, and maybe it's the sort of the band that I'm in right now, right? A 14 and a 12-year-old. And they're right on the precipice of being in situations where I can't be present or mom can't be present to make the right decision for safety and all kinds of things, right? They're the variables that start to get out of your control. And there are moments when I think to myself, no, this is a point where I really have to drive home a lesson, because it's not that it would be bad right now, but if you extrapolate that out and you play that out, sort of not asking the big question about safety or these sorts of things could play out differently in 5 years, and you think, wow, I didn't help support my child develop the skills to be able to ascertain or to be discerning in the way in which they think about the world around them, that then I've failed them. And the reason I say that is because I could easily take the sort of the easy or the lazy way out and just not bring these things up in conversation at 14 and 12. But when you said, you don't want to be sort of too depressing about it, I understand that completely, because you're right, it is. But part of me, John, says we have to. I think we owe it to the next generation, because God knows I'm seeing report after report where they're saying they don't even want to work. I mean, let alone go to school. I just saw, I don't know if it was a New Yorker or the New York Magazine, somewhere I read where they were just saying, like, we don't even want to go to work. And I think we have to have tough conversations. Sometimes it's like a coach. I love coaching. Sometimes you have to be able to sort of kneel down on the court and look at the players in the eyes and say, look, guys, do we want to win this or do we not want to win this? Or are we competing at our best? Are we working together? And those are sometimes difficult conversations. But I think we need to have them, because we're going to wake up, and instead of it being you and a smaller school that got purged in 2025, it's every day. And I don't know what it is actually, today, how many professors we're losing. I'd be pretty nervous to find out. But I think actually we need to talk about it, and we need to say it in stark terms, because I get frustrated at parents when I hear them say at the soccer field things like, oh, well, wait a minute, like I'm a little concerned that my soon-to-be college freshman is going to not know what to study, because they're going to change the degree program, and maybe they wouldn't have wanted to go to that school, or they're going to consolidate it. And it's like, well, wake up, people. At some point, we do have to wake up. There's a responsibility as a citizen to say, it's not just about me. This all works. It's an ecosystem.
Yeah. Yeah, I think
you fired me up, John.
I think, because, we're both Americans. I haven't lived in the U.S. most of my life. I feel I sort of have a unique vantage point on my own country as an anthropologist. I mean, we often say anthropology is about, coming to learn another culture or society really well and understand it. But as someone who's been away from one's own culture, I found it's very much about unlearning my own as well, so that when I do go back and visit my family and friends, that I see it a little bit differently. I've lived in different parts of the world, and it's quite interesting. And I think, from an American point of view, I don't know where your listeners are mostly gathered in what parts of the world, but anthropology, for example, insists that there are many different ways to live in the world. There are countless, infinite ways to be human in this world. And people are human in very different sorts of ways in different parts of the world. And just because, for example, we live in one place, and maybe one very powerful place, doesn't mean that we figured it all out, or that other people in other places don't have anything to share with us that could improve our life. And so, for example, getting back to this idea of this, hyper individuating society, I mean, there's a lot to be learned, and I've learned a lot myself, spending time with people in Southern Africa who have a very collective notion of themselves. It's not like an individual. I mean, it's their family, it's their lineage, it's their clan, and that always comes first before the I, or other places where this pronoun I doesn't even exist, or the I is a constellation of different relationships with people and time, and it's very different, right? And it shows that there are different ways to live in the world and to be in the world. And I think that, and that's sort of one of my things at this point in time, is like the value of a public anthropology, of trying to help ordinary people who aren't in university reading theoretical anthropology to recognize that the world has a lot on offer, and both for us as individuals and how I might live my life better and more satisfyingly, and also for us collectively as a society or community. And I think, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in that regard, especially I think in the United States and Europe, to some extent as well, but there's naturally more cultural difference surrounding people in their everyday lives than in the US. So I think that's really important to try to get those conversations out and to figure out how to have them.
I'll get you out of here on this, John. I will tell you, and this sounds shameless in this regard, for your area of discipline, but my favorite college course was actually an anthropology course at Michigan State University. My absolute favorite. It was the class that I wanted to go to. I got there early. I just soaked it up. And the reason I say
I hear
that,
it all the time. I hear it all the time. And for me, the problem with that is that no one even is exposed to this discipline until if they get to university there.
Well, yes, well put. Yeah, there was a yeah, our audio went out for just a second, but I hear what you're saying, that it's sad that it's, yeah, you're right. I didn't have exposure to that until I was in university, and it was just part of a prereq to get something done. But I really enjoyed it. It was my absolute favorite, and I tell people that to this day. My question to you is this. I'm going to go back to the day that you were let go and you were outside lecturing, giving a lecture with 30 minutes prep to your students. I'm curious if you think now, I don't mean in that moment, but I would have to think that because of your background, that there had to have been this sort of push-pull in that moment, because it's as if you were trying to preserve a language that's slipping away from a culture because the younger people maybe aren't speaking it anymore. They're not speaking in the homes, influx of immigrants who speak different languages, whatever. It's almost like you were trying to save a language, which I respect greatly. And I wonder if you thought to yourself, I'm wondering if there's a parallel lesson here that, one, you have a responsibility because you care to share that experience of being fired, what that means, sort of bigger picture with your students, than even the subject matter of anthropology. I mean, did you feel in that moment as if you were, I think back and in one of the pieces of research about you, it's a little bit of Robin Williams, right, in Dead Poet Society, and trying to understand how do we meet the moment contextually, how do we inspire based on the past, and how do we universally look forward, understanding we may see different things on that line, that horizon line, and that's okay. I would think that was a very powerful experience when you think about it retrospectively, because you were there balancing two different fronts. Is that fair?
I mean, it's a year and a half on, and I'm really still at it in different ways, and in ways that aren't as public as that. I'm involved in, some legal stuff, and I'm still working on it. I mean, it was like a condensation of like a half a life's work project, building this type of program that we were all really proud of, and that I would have been very happy if my children had gone through this program if I didn't work there. And at the same time, the events of those months, which we're still sort of experiencing today, happening all around the world, and these signals I was getting from Southern Africa and from the US and in the UK, and it just sort of all was coming together in a singular moment. And I've seen how our type of thinking and also my discipline's thinking works. Most anthropologists at universities are out there researching, writing books, and I've done that as well. But because I was at an undergraduate honors college, so much of my work took place with students. And most of my students, they don't go on to become anthropologists or even study anthropology. They maybe take one course. But I would see the scientists roll in on day one and roll their eyes. This is subjective nonsense. I mean, we need objectivity and, da-da-da. And by the end of the semester, they have been shifted. And that's all that it was taking. And it was sort of like, it didn't seem, we just needed a little bit of space in the conversation to have some impact. And it was sort of like they were sucking that last bit of oxygen, that last bit of space out of both, my personal life, but out of the university and out of society as, AI and non-human thinking starts taking over everything. And it just sort of seemed to come together for me. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know if that answers your question or not, but it was a powerful moment where I just sort of felt a little possessed by it all.
Yeah, no, it absolutely does. And the fact that you started it by saying you're still in it speaks volumes to your commitment beyond yourself. And I'd like to celebrate and bring those stories to the forefront, because I think we're losing a sense of that. And you're doing it from thousands of miles away from where, from the US in that regard. And it's really important for people to hear that. John, I want to make sure people can find you or follow your work and your perspective. Where should they go?
I am available on TikTok, Instagram, and YouTube at, what is my handle? At Professor John T. Friedman is the handle. Or you can just look up Professor John Friedman Anthropology and I'll pop up. And they'll be able to get in touch with me through all three of those channels as well. And I'd really been enjoying
for
my
all the right reasons.
Yeah, no, I mean, I up until February 20th of 2025, I did not step a single foot into social media, not even the LinkedIn page, no Facebook, nothing. And I have learned really a lot from my students and my daughters. And I have to say, I had some apprehensions and some wrong ideas about that space. And I've been having a really interesting time in social media, talking to people and young people, and many of them not ever having yet been exposed to anthropology. And it's been quite an interesting learning curve for me. I've really learned a lot and I've enjoyed it. So I welcome lots of participants to come and join the conversation there.
Well, I highly recommend it for folks. I think John's very thoughtful and is willing to have conversations and perspectives that may not be popular by those who don't like things that are uncomfortable, but that are real, have meaning, and impact not just ourselves, but our communities around the world. We want to thank John Friedman again. I'm your host, Dr. Rod Berger. This has been another episode of the Dr. Rod Berger Show, presented by my friends at Fair Observer. If you're looking for independence, diversity, and debate, you can go to fairobserver.com, where we understand the world one perspective at a time.